This is Mark Strassman, reporter with California Politics Today and Solar World. We're about to speak to Scott Macdonald, who's a spokesperson for the No on 87 campaign. Welcome to California Politics Today and Solar World.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I tried to log on to the No on 87 campaign today at noon87.com and tried it again at noon87.org, and it took me to yeson87.org. What's up with that?
You'll have to ask the people who did that, which is the Yes campaign, and starting off with that is kind of interesting. It's part of a long list of unfortunate things about this initiative campaign that I guess we'll get into, where the other side wants to mislead and apparently misguide the voters, and it's unfortunate. And this is a clear presentation of that when they buy some kind of URL that people think they're going to get information about us, and instead it goes to them.
Tell people who want to get to the No on 87 campaign what the proper URL is.
Sure, it's nooiltax.com.
Okay.
Nooiltax spelled out.com.
Great. Now I drove here from the San Fernando Valley. It's 11 in the morning. It's about 95 degrees already. It's been hotter this last few weeks than I can ever remember being in Los Angeles. Climate scientists say it's the hottest first half of the year. It's the hottest decade. This is widely attributed to global warming. What role does the production and consumption of petroleum products play in this, and what do you think ought to be the proper attitude of the oil companies and people sitting in the temperature about this question?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not the scientist who can answer that question, and I also know that I've never heard global warming and Proposition 87 in the same sentence, so I have no idea why the question is part of the interview.
Well,
global warming is something people need to be concerned about, but I don't think Prop 87 is not even being sold. It's being sold about a lot of things, for a lot of things that it won't do. It's a $4 billion oil tax.
Right.
It will drive up the cost of our gasoline. It will create a huge bureaucracy, and it will reduce revenues for schools, law enforcement, and public health.
As I understand it, the proponents of Prop 87 want to reduce the consumption of petroleum. That's their avowed purpose in this bill, to develop alternative energy sources and to take money from oil companies and give it to alternative energy research and buy downs and other incentives, which they see as the stated goal is to reduce the consumption of petroleum by 25% over the next 10 years, which they attribute to the burning of which to which they attribute global warming in part.
The proponents of this initiative can talk about a lot of things,
right?
But we should talk about the initiative. And
okay.
The initiative does not require any kind of success in any way on anything. It just requires the spending of $4 billion plus in our taxpayer dollars. And unfortunately for California consumers, it won't guarantee them anything. It won't guarantee the money spent in California. It won't guarantee them any results. And it doesn't even give any kind of legislative oversight for what's happening, so that we get some kind of review of whether anything we want to have happen would happen.
When you say taxpayer dollars, that this tax would be paid solely by the producers of oil, wouldn't it?
And they're taxpayers.
That they are taxpayers, but
yes.
The vast bulk of California taxpayers are not oil producers and wouldn't be paying this tax, would they?
We are all, as California consumers, would be paying for Proposition 87.
Explain that. Explain how that would work.
Proposition 87 is a $4 billion tax on oil production in the state of California. That is, Economics 101 tells you that will end up in the cost of the commodity. And you're going to say that they've written in the bill that it cannot be passed through, and that's all well and good. But when you tax something, you get less of it. And if you tax oil production in California, you're going to have less oil production. You have less oil from California. But if you're not doing anything about the demand, then you're going to have the same demand. You have to fill up that loss in oil production with foreign oil. Foreign oil is much more expensive than California oil, and that's going to impact us at the gas pump.
Is oil produced in California goes to manufacturers at a lower price than oil produced in Nigeria, Iran, or Venezuela?
Yes, California oil does not need to be transported across vast oceans to get here. California oil is here in California. And our California oil is refined in California because we have a unique blend of gasoline that helps to keep our air cleaner than it used to be.
I want to focus on this question of pass-through.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners what pass-through means, and then we're going to talk about what they say and what you say and what the issue there is.
Well, there's what they say, and then there's the reality. And the reality is that when you add $4 billion to the tax, you tax oil production by $4 billion, you get less oil production, and you have to replace it with more expensive foreign oil. And that's the reality of the world. And California voters are very sophisticated. They've been through this a lot, where they're presented with something that sounds good at the beginning, but they're also experienced enough to realize that maybe it's not what it appears to be, or maybe it's not the answer. The proponents of Prop 87 are going to try to do a lot of things, and they're going to try to tell us we have to do something about alternative energy. Yes, we must do something about alternative energy. Yes, we must have research and development. Proposition 87 just sends us in the wrong direction.
What would you and the oil companies like to see done in terms of alternative energy research and use?
Well, there are a couple things. First off, there's a lot being done. California taxpayers right now are spending billions of dollars supporting. Every time they go to the DMV and register, every time they get a smog check, there's money invested in alternative energy. Have we reached the solution? No. Are oil companies invested in this? Yes, they are also as well. But we're not voting on any of that. We're voting on Proposition 87, and that is what all these questions are. And this is part of the problem with the campaign being waged by other people. They want to throw out words and accusations that have nothing to do with the initiative they're presenting to the voters. And I think it's their job to sell their initiative and not spend the time with character assassination, etc. We're happy to talk about the initiative. In fact, we'd love to talk about Prop 87.
We're going to talk about Section 42004,
Right.
subsection C of the initiative. It reads,
Yes.
the assessment imposed by this part shall not be passed on to consumers through higher prices for oil, gasoline, or diesel fuel.
The legislative analyst, the independent legislative analyst, says that they can say that, but there's no way that it's going to be. There's no way to tell if it's being enforced, especially since it creates a situation where we have to use more expensive oil, and it creates a further dependence on foreign oil. That's not where we want to go. We also don't want to create a huge bureaucracy with 50 political appointees without the checks and balances of our normal government system. There are a lot of questions to be answered about what this initiative would do to California. Why would we want to create a system that is going to reduce revenues for schools, law enforcement, public health, and other programs in the state of California?
Explain the mechanism as you see it that would do that.
Well, it's an independent legislative analyst, and her review of Proposition 87 says that because...
Who is that? You got a name?
What's her name? I'm
Okay,
sorry.
right.
Elizabeth...
She works for the state of California?
She's an independent legislative analyst, yes. She works for the state of California, hired by the legislature
Right.
to review, and she reviews all initiatives.
And she said?
And her review is in your, voter pamphlet that will
Right.
come in the mail.
Right.
And she says that Prop 87 will work to reduce revenues available for schools, law enforcement, and other government programs because because California gets much money for its general fund from corporate income taxes. And
Right.
oil producers pay corporate income taxes.
Right.
And by this new tax will mean they'll have less money to pay. They will have less obligation in the corporate income tax area, which goes to the general fund. This new tax will be spent on nothing except for the proponents' programs, which means education and other programs don't get any share of it.
You just said that various programs in the state will have less revenue because the corporations that extract oil will have lower profits because they'll have spent more money on this tax. Is that what you just said?
They'll have, like California has a lot of taxes on oil.
Right.
You have sales tax, you have gas taxes,
Right.
you have corporate income tax.
Right.
When you pay,
and all those taxes are deductible from profits and
right,
don't have
right,
to...
like people,
pay.
like all, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But does that imply that the cost won't be passed through and the profits won't be maintained?
It doesn't say anything about that. What it says is that if you add an extra tax
Right.
to someone's, you make
Right.
you make $100 and now
Right.
I got to pay $10 over here. Now
Right.
I'm only making $90.
Right.
So I'm only going to pay this tax
right.
of $90.
But you just said two things. One, that revenues to the state would be lower because
Prop 87.
because of Prop 87, because the oil corporations would have lower revenues in the amount of the tax. Is that what you just said?
No, their revenues will remain the same. Their tax write-off would be greater because you're adding a tax onto the burden of a
Right. But doesn't that imply that their profits, that they won't be passing the extra cost through, which you just said in spite of the
This has
language?
nothing to do with the price at the pump. This has to do with whether schools, law
No.
enforcement,
What
and the independent legislative analyst says
Right. No, but
that
I'm
this
trying to
measure
understand-
will
right.
reduce the revenue available for schools, law enforcement. That's why the Peace Officers Research Association in California is opposed. That's why John Mockler, the former Secretary of Education, is opposed and has done a study that shows that schools will be hurt by Proposition 87.
Apart from their analysis and position, you just explained that the reason schools and other institutions would suffer would be because they get less revenue, and that would be because the tax liability of the oil corporations would be less by the amount of this tax, severance tax, right? Won't their profits go up, be maintained by the pass-through, which you said is prohibited by the law, but would happen anyway?
This is regardless of, it's regardless of pass-through or anything. If they make X amount of dollars,
right,
they have a tax liability through their corporate income tax,
right,
to the state of California.
Right.
That tax liability would be reduced,
right,
by Prop 87. That has nothing to do with whether they make, how much money they make. It has to do with Prop 87 taxing them. So now schools, law enforcement, other critical programs are not, the general fund of the state of California is reduced.
Right.
Not to mention property taxes also will be reduced,
right,
for local programs.
But you said notwithstanding the language of the bill, which prohibits the pass-through, are you saying that prices will rise commensurate with that tax anyway?
No.
The price at the pump will rise anyway, despite the language of the bill that says it can't be passed through?
I'm saying California gasoline will be more expensive because this, whether it goes up or down, I don't know.
Well, will it become more expensive because the oil companies will make it more expensive when they charge to the gasoline
It becomes more
station?
expensive when what goes into the gasoline is more expensive because Prop 87 will produce less California oil and will have more expensive foreign oil and increase our foreign oil dependence.
Okay.
That is actually from a study that was conducted by Bill Ham, the former legislative analyst of the state of California.
I want to see if you agree with the Orange County Register, which agrees with you that the provision for no pass-through is they call it a socialist dream. And what they say, but get this, the initiative, Prop 87, prohibits producers from passing the tax on to consumers. That's a socialist dream. In a free market, producers must pass on higher costs to consumers or go broke. If producers somehow were to be prohibited from passing on the cost, the state could suffer 1970s-style shortages and lines at the pump. How much of what the Orange County Register's libertarian editorial page do you agree with in that statement?
And I don't know what socialist dream of.
So
I know that Proposition 87 is bad for California. There are no guarantees of anything out of it except for the fact that gasoline prices will go up and revenues for schools and law enforcement and others will go down.
Okay.
It also is bad government, and it creates brand new huge bureaucracy with 50 political appointees, and these people are not working under the types of conflict of interest laws and other things that we expect in our state government, and it does not require legislative oversight of the programs that would be created by Prop 87. In fact, it doesn't guarantee us anything to come out of it, and that's $4 billion that we're just going to spend.
The criticisms that you just made are very reminiscent of criticisms that others have made of Prop 71, the stem cell initiative, which, according to its critics, sets up an unresponsive bureaucracy entitled to spend $3 billion of California funds. Do you have any comment on the process, on the procedure by which wealthy entrepreneurs in the Silicon Valley draft airtight, extensively complicated initiatives, spend money to put them spend millions to put it on the ballot, millions to get them passed, and stand to make billions in money back to them and their friends?
Well, there's no doubt that Mr. Koslaw and others who are behind this have a lot of money to be made out of this free $4 billion that would be created out of Prop 87.
Do you believe there are provisions in the bill that would prevent them from cashing in on their own project?
No, I don't think there are at all, and I think there are provisions in the bill that add to concerns about just that kind of issue, and not just with him, but I mean talking about you can appoint people to these advisory commissions who will be able to suggest that millions of dollars be directed towards the company they work for. That's not the kind of government we expect.
Section 3K of the Clean Alternative Energy Act requires mandatory independent audits, annual progress reports, that the leaders of this project are accountable to the people of California. What do you say about that?
We say that sounds nice, but it doesn't really require anything under the legal wording that is required in the state to provide that. An independent audit, legislative oversight would be nice. None of these appointees have to go through the legislature. And none of these, that's it. Thank you. You did it yourself. None of these appointees have to go through a legislative review. The whole program is not subject to the legislature's review. That's why we say when there are no results that are guaranteed for California voters, and we're going to spend $4 billion, and no one's even going to come back and say, shape up and do something.
Yes, on 87, Chief Scientist and Spokesperson Dr. Shelley Luce told me last week that Prop 87 is not a windfall profits tax. The language of the bill says California is the only major oil producing state in the country that does not impose a comparable fee on oil produced at its wells. California oil producers are enjoying windfall profits at the expense of California consumers and taxpayers. In your view, is this a windfall profits tax?
Not at all. This is not a profits tax. Not a tax on profits at all. It's a tax on oil production. And I'd like to correct what you said about severance taxes and fees.
Please.
Because this is part of the problem we see with the campaign, the deceptive campaign being waged by the other side. Not only do they buy the URL to misdirect voters, but they this whole question of a severance fee. California, in fact, does charge a fee for the extraction of oil. That money goes and supports the Department of Oil and Gas that oversees regulation of this industry. It is a smaller fee than charged in other states, but in fact exists. So say it doesn't exist is just simply not true. And the reality of oil production and taxes is that there are a variety of ways to tax oil, and California has the 5th highest taxes on oil in the country. We have other states don't have income taxes on corporations. Other states don't have the sales taxes that we have. So when you add it all up, California is right now number 5. You add Prop 87, and we are far and away the highest taxing state in the country on oil, and of course, then it leads to everything at the gasoline.
Section F, subsection F of Section 2 says consumers should be protected from any attempt at price gouging by big oil companies if they try to pass along their assessment costs by increasing gas prices at the pump. You've addressed this issue again. You want to do it?
Well, that's
yet again.
You're giving me a philosophy and not anything that's part of the initiative. So.
Oh no, that's in the fine. That's in one of the that's language from the initiative.
It's telling us they should be protected from price gouging.
Right.
Price gouging is a bad thing, but whether it's going on, what Prop 87 would do about it, it doesn't is not. I don't think there's anything that would do about anything. It's certainly not going to do much about alternative fuels, which we need.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about. It says
advance alternative fuels in this state, and Prop 87 is not going to help.
How important is it that the state get alternative fuels, and what do you think is the best approach to do that?
It's critically important that California work towards development, research, finding the most workable alternative fuels. However, history would suggest that government bureaucrats are not the best people to pick the winners and losers in this, especially when they work without the checks and balances we would expect in a normal government system, to reward millions of dollars to pet projects, when in fact the best pet projects will come out of the marketplace, will come out of the ideas of people who are working today in the equivalent of the Silicon Valley garage and coming up with the alternative fuel programs of the future.
Okay, Prop 71, which I referred to, which has many structural similarities and origin similarities with Prop 87, raises the $3 billion that are to be spent on embryonic stem cell research through the sale of bonds.
Right.
And the repayment of those bonds, the $3 billion bonds, with $6 billion in California taxpayer money. Prop 87 raises $4 billion by taxing oil production. But it has, and I haven't seen this anywhere else in the media, a lot to say about bonds.
Right.
And it says that, and it provides, it starts off by saying that while the Attorney General is the legal counsel for the group set up by Prop 87, it's within the power of that group to employ bond counsel as may be deemed advisable in connection with the issuance and sale of bonds. What's the deal with bond sales within Prop 87, and how do you feel about that?
That is it's a very good question, and one that needs to be reviewed closer. We do know that there are issues around that in the sense that, like a lot of Prop 87, they're allowed to develop their own rules that guide the rewarding of contracts, and they're not bound by the regular state of California rules that would.
Again, this is like Prop 71.
Would provide that provide you with protections against conflict of interest, provide people who feel like they have not been treated fairly in the process. Those people would, under the state of California rules, would have a complaint system. They don't under Prop 87. The bond measure situation is one in which they are mandated to spend $4 billion, not just required to spend $4 billion in 10 years. These bonds that would be issued would be guaranteed by what revenue, we're not sure, because they're already required to spend that $4 billion, and I'm not sure it's more of it. And in fact, if they issue bonds and then they go away, who's going to be left with holding the bag? Well, apparently the state of California would be the most.
As far as I can see, though, and it's pretty obscure language, the bonds would be sold, and the revenues to repay them would come from the $4 billion that would be raised by the oil severance tax, which means presumably that rather than wait for 10 years to collect the $4 billion and spend it, that the administrators of this program could issue bonds in the amount of, let's say, $4 billion. Well, $2 billion, because you essentially have to pay $2 to get $1 for a bond. So they could issue bonds in the amount of $2 billion to get the $2 billion right up front and say, well, we really need to move really fast, so we'll get the $2 billion. Then as the $4 billion comes in, they would pay back that $4 billion in exchange for the $2 billion they got up front, and that $2 billion would go to presumably the same associates of the people who are organizing this as the Prop 71 money goes to. Is that feasible under this legislation?
Well, I think the part that takes a big step of confidence in bureaucracy is that they're going to administer it so purely as you've said. I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Well, that's apart from how they administer it. That's just how they raise the money and spend it.
There are just a lot of things that people can be left holding the bag for, and I don't think a lot of people trust an unchecked bureaucracy. This is why legislative oversight is so important, and when it's missing in Prop 87, it creates a major question mark. And there's no reason we have to accept Prop 87. I think that's part of the problem with this whole issue is, it's because someone says, here's our idea, well, thank you for it, that's good. Thank you for participating in the discussion, but Prop 87 is a long list of problems. Let's go back to the drawing board and find something that will work for California. We don't have to accept something that's going to.
Okay. As I was researching this, I came across a post from July 11, 2006, on a site that addresses energy issues. It says this person Olafart says, if you really want to do something constructive, place a 10% extraction tax on oil and give a dollar for dollar tax credit to businesses and individuals for the purchase and installation of American-made solar panels. Eventually, the state of California would be covered in solar panels. On a national basis, impose a $20 per barrel fee on imported oil and a similar fee on domestic oil. Offer tax credits to domestic producers for investments in non-carbon-based renewable energy. Offer tax credits to businesses and individuals for solar energy with monies from the import fees. What's your view and the oil company's view on a proposal like this instead of Prop 87?
Let me make it clear, I don't speak for the oil companies, I speak for Prop 87. But as far as that is concerned, is part of an active discussion of what we need to do in this country, and that's a very good thing. Second, it talks about investing that money at home. Prop 87 doesn't guarantee that one dime will be spent in California, let alone in the United States of America. It doesn't do anything to promote a homegrown alternative energy industry. The money can be spent wherever they want to spend it.
Saying you don't speak for the oil companies, could you talk a little bit about the structure and funding of the No on 87 campaign? Who's paying for it? How much are they paying? How have they set it up?
Well, there's no membership fee.
Right.
We've raised something in the area of $10 million. I know the other side says they're going to spend 50, so I guess we better catch up.
And who's contributed the $10 million?
That's all available on the Secretary of State's website, and you're welcome to go there. But I'll tell you that there are almost 200 organizations now, and there'll be well more than that by Election Day, who are opposed to Proposition 87, who are working hard to defeat it. And they are small businesses who cannot not spend more money on gasoline and fuel without having to worry about laying off employees and closing the doors. There are also groups like the Peace Officers Research Association in California, the largest law enforcement group in the state, opposed because this will take money from law enforcement. There are organizations throughout, the minority and small business organizations that
what generally is their take on the measure, and why are they opposed to it?
They are working daily, struggling daily in some cases to keep their small businesses alive. They are paying now gasoline prices at over $3 a gallon, and they see this as something that's going to increase their costs, and that is something they just can't afford at this point.
Apart from the mechanism set forth in Prop 87, do you believe it's realistic and or desirable to cut oil consumption by 25% in over 10 years in California?
I don't know. Is it realistic or desirable? It is. I don't know if it's realistic. I do.
Okay. Do you think it's desirable?
I think in 10 years, I don't know if depends on.
Over any time period. Do you think oil consumption ought to continue to increase, or be stabilized, or reduce?
It's a finite resource.
It is a finite resource
at some point.
Right.
But it depends on what do you have available to replace it. It's an incomplete question, because you say we're just going to cut this and you get nothing. Then what are we going to do?
Well, the proponents of 87 say the money will be spent to phase in and commercialize and increase the uptake of alternative energy.
They say
sources.
that.
That's what
Proposition
they say.
87 itself does not guarantee, does not even does not require them to have any kind of success. It just requires them to spend $4 billion. It doesn't require and even allow legislative overview or oversight of what they're doing with that money and whether or not we're getting anything out of it.
It says that that the bill can be amended, but with a 2/3 majority in both houses of the California legislature.
That every initiative says that.
Right. Well, not Prop 71. It said it couldn't be
No.
for 3 years, and then it needed a 70% level. The proponents of Prop 87 say it will generate jobs and industry in California. What do you say about that?
I would say that's a bunch of hooey because it doesn't require any money to be spent in California. And if you're going to create jobs in California, that would be part of the process. Or it doesn't even require it to be spent in the United States. So that's another thing nice for them to say. But Prop 87 itself won't do that.
You say they set no standards for progress. What do you mean by that?
That someone, let's say someone comes in and says, I've turned my egg beater into something that's going to create fuel for the rest of the, for the entire world for generations to come. Okay. We give them $1 million for their egg beater plan and it doesn't do anything. Is this where the money's being spent? Is it being spent only for the companies that the people who sit on these advisory commissions work for? Or are we getting something for our dollar? And there is no requirement that anybody even take a look at that. And that's people, if we're mandating them spend $4 billion, we believe the people of California deserve some kind of oversight to see where this is all going.
Has No on 87 done any polling? And if so, what kind of results have you seen?
The polling, yes, we have done polling. And the polling
what does it show?
It shows that people are very much in favor of alternative energy sources. And as are we. I mean, that argument is done. We are all on board with that argument.
Well,
but Prop 87, but they're also California voters, and we've all been there. We've all heard about a proposition that said, "Oh, that's an excellent idea," and then on further review, we think there's this problem, that problem, and they vote no eventually.
So, what's the focus that you're going to take in the campaign to convince people that they should vote no on this?
Well, that this is a $4 billion tax on oil production in the state of California. It will increase our gasoline, our jet fuel, our diesel prices. It creates a huge bureaucracy with 50 political appointees who are not subject to the usual checks and balances of our system. And it will reduce revenues for education, law enforcement, for public health programs, for local government. And it is simply not the way to go about developing alternatives.
What means are you going to use to communicate that message?
Well, we're going to spend 30 minutes on a new internet political resource, which we value. And we will be everywhere across the state. One of the things we do very well, I believe, as a campaign is develop our coalition list, our grassroots type of, you get the Los Angeles Mexican American Chamber of Commerce on board, and then you get them to talk to their members about why Prop 87 is bad.
Do you envision that there'll be punchy 30-second television commercials in major media markets?
Yeah, I'm absolutely. I'm sure if they're going to spend $50 million, they got to buy some.
You're going to do some of those too.
I'm sure we will have.
How would you compare the amount of information people will get on either side in those 30-second commercials and the amount of information they get in a 30-minute in-depth video discussion of the issues like we're having?
Well, this is more of a political scientist question. And
right.
The answer, I think, is if you have time to sit through 30 minutes
right.
online, then you will get a lot more information.
Okay.
The average person is trying to get their kids off to school, trying to get dinner on the table, and they don't always have the time to sit down for that. Now,
this is an important issue. It involves $4 billion. Would the No on 87 people be happy to have a debate with the Yes on 87 people?
We'll have them all over the state, I'm sure. They will be. Many organizations are set up to have that kind of thing, and of course we're open to discussing this wherever and whenever we can, because we're trying to educate the voters about what's wrong with it.
Solar World and California Politics Today have done 30-minute interviews with a spokesperson for Yes on 87 and now No on 87. Would you be happy to sit down with Shelley Luce or someone else from Yes on 87 in front of this camera and debate the issues?
Sure, absolutely, I'm sure.
Okay. In what ways are you going to be using the internet besides this interview to get your message out?
That's nooiltax.com is our website, and of course that's been an interesting part of campaigns, is how that has become an increasingly critical part of the entire measure. It provides, reporters can go there and get an instant news media kit. Voters can go there and get the latest information, and we can now update it with various things like a blog we have and podcasts we hope to employ, and just news about what the campaign is doing on a daily basis. So that's a very valuable part of it. And we have you can send an email to your friends saying, this is an important issue, please pay attention, this is why it's bad, from our website. There are a variety of things you can do over the internet that make campaigning much more of that bring it home to people in the ways that we never were able to do that before.
Thank you very much for helping us do that right now, right here.
Yes, thank you.